Hello my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to our entitled people, where people truly believe they can do what they want, when they want, because they're special. And in today's episode, we're dealing with nightmare Karen bosses, guys, but they're messing with the wrong employee and getting what they deserve. So if you've ever dealt with a bad boss, you'll love this one. I hope you enjoy the stories. Hit subscribe if you're not subscribed, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So this is a tale back when I used to flip burgers and fry chicken nuggets. It was my very first job. When they brought me in for orientation, my manager Alex asked what I wanted to do. They were short on cash or the grill, and I could choose one for now and later be trained on the other positions. So like any lazy high school kid who didn't want to spend my day slaving over a hot stove, said cashier. So they trained me on cashier and only cashier. Well, my first day, manager Karen was there instead of Alex, and she stuck me on grill. And to be frank, I had no problem with the grill. But since I hadn't been trained on it, I had no idea what I was doing, obviously. So I spent the whole shift relying on my coworkers to tell me how things worked. Of course, Karen notices this, and she pulls me off the grill for my incompetence. I tried to explain, but no dice. She then made me clock out and watch all the cooking training videos in the back room. From that day on, anytime Karen was manager on my shift, I'd be on grill or the fryers. I only got to be a cashier when Alex was on duty. And that's when I noticed that all the cashiers on Karen's shift were always women, even though everyone's supposed to rotate. Well, one morning, Karen decides to let me run the register. Everything was going fine until the end of shift, and somehow I'm $10 short. Now, I'm meticulous when it comes to money, because I was raised poor, so I knew it wasn't my fault. Of course, I had no way to prove this because we weren't allowed to count our drawers before starting, which now I know is bad. So I get written up, yada yada yada, and I was told if I kept stealing money, they would have to fire me. But here's the thing though. I would have been okay with it as crap does happen. But this was despite another girl cashier missing over $20 one week and not getting written up or anything, so I thought that was odd. Well, after that, I wasn't allowed to run the cash anymore because Karen kept telling me that I was a little thief. The snide remarks and abuse from Karen continued for another couple of months, and then one day, Alex comes to me. Alex tells me that I was deliberately set up so that Karen would have a valid reason to never let me touch the register again. So of course, I asked Alex why he thought Karen was targeting me. And that's when Alex said, from what he heard, is it's because I wasn't pretty enough. Well, that just blew my gasket. I start looking for another job and eventually I got one lined up. I then put my notice in, but I cut myself short. 2 days after I put in my notice, Karen's boss came in for an inspection. I wait for them to get to the grill, turn to Karen, who was standing right around them, and this is what happens. I say, I quit. Karen says to me, I know that. You gave your notice the other day. I tell her, no, I'm quitting right now. I then turn to one of the bosses and I say, I'm sorry to go back on my word, but I wanted you to know why I'm quitting. I'm quitting because our manager doesn't let cashiers count their drawers. I'm quitting because she continually asks me to do things that I haven't been trained on and then insults me when I don't do it right. But most of all, I'm quitting so she can hire someone who she thinks is pretty enough to be seen by customers in her store. And just like that, I walked to the back, grabbed my things, and left. Of course, Karen went white as a sheet, and I heard the big boss say, "Back office, now." Unfortunately, she didn't get fired, but I did keep in touch with my friends, and they said Karen was relocated to another store. I hear from my friends that still work there that everyone is treated better with her gone. Well, that's not surprising, is it? Get rid of a horrible manager and the place magically becomes so much better. Who would have thought, right? But guys, I'm honestly surprised that she was allowed to do that for however long she did. And I do wonder how many workers she did this to, because OP can't be the first, right? Like, imagine not being allowed to deal with customers because some Karen boss, in her own opinion, happens to think you're too ugly to take somebody's burger order. As if that matters, right? Also, the fact that she made OP clock out to watch training videos, I'm pretty sure that's violating labor laws. And I'd like to think that her getting transferred was a demotion of some sort. But guys, if you think that boss was entitled, we're just getting started. Listen to this one. So let me tell you a story that I recently had been reminded of that happened well over 15 years ago. I had the displeasure of working with a nasty Karen boss. I used to work at a movie rental store when those were a big thing, and I had caught a bad stomach virus one day before a shift. About every 10 to 15 minutes, I would throw up and literally poop myself. If you've ever had a stomach virus, you'd know what that's like. So of course, I call in 7 hours before my shift, since I was working the second shift that day. I called and left a voicemail for my boss, saying I couldn't come in. Well, my boss calls me back not even 10 minutes later, and she left a voicemail, and she told me I either worked that day or I was fired, and to pick one. So I called back in to plead my case, but no budge. And seeing as rent was due and I had to keep food on the table, and if I was fired I wouldn't be able to pay for both, I was forced to come in. But of course, with having a stomach bug, after 10 minutes I had to run to the bathroom to throw up. And since I had to leave the register to do this, Karen boss wasn't happy and she writes me up for abandoning post. She then scolds me in the back and she told me if it happens again, I was gonna be let go. She even went as far as to put a trash can right next to me, and she said use this if I felt sick. Do not abandon my post. So, not wanting to live homeless the next month, I do what I was told. After about the 7th time I dry heave into the trash can, my face very pale, my boss comes out and she tells me to go home, and that I was fired because customers were disgusted. She said that I was making customers uncomfortable with my dry heaving into a bucket. I went home and I panicked how I'm gonna make rent, etc. The next day, the district manager calls me and asked how I was feeling. I told him I'm better than the day before, but not 100%. He told me okay, and asked if he could see me tomorrow if I was feeling well, and to please come in if I can. Nothing else to do, I say yes. So the next day, I go in to meet him, and my Karen boss was there too. I was thinking it was an exit interview or something. The district manager then said that there were so many customer complaints about me that Karen boss had to let me go on the spot, and then asked me what happened. That's when I told him everything. I told him I called in 7 hours before, said I was really ill, and I was told I'd be fired if I didn't come into work. Hearing that, of course Karen boss denies it, saying I was more than welcome to take an unpaid day off. But since I needed the hours, I chose to come in anyways, despite her telling me many times to stay home and rest. That made me mad. Now, firing me, I can understand, but lying to make me look bad to save yourself, that's crossing the line. That's when I pull out my phone and I played the voicemail Karen left me. And she even had the nerve to get angry at me after hearing it, as if to say, what the F are you doing? I was then asked to leave the room for a few minutes, but to hang around in the store, as I'd be talked to afterwards. About 10 minutes later, I see Karen walk out of the store, pissed off, tears in her eyes. She did look at me, but she didn't say a word. That's when district manager calls me in and fills me in. Well, it seems that night when she fired me, there was a secret shopper in the line. The shopper noted how nice I was being, despite being obviously too sick to work. When the shopper saw me getting fired for being too sick to work in a line full of customers, she was outraged. And after I left, she told off my Karen boss and then asked for the district manager's number, which my boss refused at first, but then gave her the wrong number to contact. But since she was a secret shopper and she knew the correct number to begin with, she called district manager and told him what went down. District manager then pulls the security tape that night and confirmed that Karen did indeed hand me a trash can, and confirmed the part about letting me go in front of a line full of customers. He then told me that he asked for my side of the story just for record purposes, and that I had my job back if I wanted it back. That he appreciates me coming in and was so sorry I had to go through all of that with Karen. He also agreed to put 2 days of paid time off on my paycheck for that week. On top of that, he made one of the shift leads the new store manager, and he gave me the shift lead spot, which bumped my pay up by $2 an hour at the time. I ended up working there for another year, until I found a better job. What a satisfying post that was, guys, and honestly, I love the fact that Karen cries herself out of the store because she deserves it, right? Like, how some bosses treat other people like garbage is beyond me. Like, you had to power trip over a sick employee, force them to come into work, embarrass them in front of customers by handing them a bucket knowing full well what was gonna happen, and then fired them and lied about it. I just hope Karen never gets into a management position ever again. And in my opinion, she deserves way worse than what happened. And the secret shopper helping OP out, talk about being in the right place at the right time. Many years ago, I worked for an organization providing frontline customer service. It was a decent place to work, but our manager ruled the place with an iron fist. It had lots of rules. One of the rules was that we couldn't do any personal printing with the printers at work. If we did, we were expected to pay 50 cents per page for black and white printing and $1 per page for color. Now, I'm not sure who made this rule, but the manager was constantly reminding us and making us pay up. One day, I was interviewing for another job within the organization, but at another location. Prior to the interview, the manager of the other location asked me if I would mind printing a copy of my resume and bringing it with me, as their printers were down for the day. I said no problem, and I figured I would print it at work since it was work-related. The closest printer was located between my manager's desk and an employee's desk, so I printed, stand up, and went to go get it. Before I got to the printer though, my manager gets there first. My print job went ahead of hers. When she saw what I'd printed, she said, "Oh, P, this looks like a personal print job. You know what that means." I tried explaining it wasn't, but she disagreed, and she said that since it had nothing to do with our day-to-day work, I had to pay. I remember her exact snooty tone as she said it. She said, "It's $2 for 4 black and white pages, so cough it up." I begrudgingly paid up. And that's when I also asked her what happens to the money. And she said she always puts it in the Christmas party fund. And I thought, all right. A few weeks later, it was lunchtime, and everyone except my manager agrees to go to a nearby restaurant for lunch. I had walked out of our building, and I realized I forgot my wallet, so I quickly ran back inside to get it. When I got to my desk, I could hear the printer going. I was curious what was being printed as it was spitting out page after page after page. I quickly glanced at the pile and I saw at least 100 pages printed in color, announcing it was a Sweet 16 for Trista, the manager's daughter. It very obviously belonged to my manager. I just stood by the printer for a minute, and that's when my manager comes out of the bathroom a moment later, and she seemed shocked to see me standing there. I picked up the pile, passed it to her, and I told her that the Christmas party fund was going to be getting a big boost. She then began stammering that she's the boss and that she's allowed to when I interrupt her and I said the rules are for everyone, right? So cough it up. She said nothing, but she looked really uncomfortable. A few weeks later, our district manager makes his quarterly visit. He talked about the upcoming Christmas party and how excited he was for it. That's when I decide to make sure she really coughs up the money, instead of saying she was going to contribute. I just raised my hand and I said, I'm just wondering how much we've accumulated this year for the Christmas party from the print jobs. The guy looked so confused and he asked me to explain what I meant. So I told him our manager's rule of 50 cents for black and whites and $1 for each page printed in color. As soon as I said that, I could literally feel the glare my manager was giving me from the side. He got really quiet and he said he would have to review this. The next day, my manager sends an email saying the printing rule was something she was misinformed about, and it would be abolished immediately. Me, being the little crap disturber I am, hit reply all, and I asked what would happen to the already accumulated funds. She said she would figure that out, and that's when someone else said that we should have a nice healthy fund for a pizza lunch, and everyone agrees. The next day, I hear my manager ordering pizzas for lunch. Also, she used her own personal credit card to pay for it all. Now, do I think she was pocketing the printing money all along? Absolutely. But it was fun making her sweat and then having to pay nearly $300 the next day in pizza to make up for it. OP is an absolute legend, guys. And seriously, that pizza must have tasted delicious just knowing that it came out of Karen's own pockets. Well, I guess the staff's pockets. And really, she should consider herself super lucky to even have a job, especially after that. Like, if she was pocketing all the print money all along from the employees, that's major theft, right? And she should be fired. And that's not even considering how much money she could be stealing from the company on top of that. But yeah, $300 is a small price to pay compared to what could have happened, and I'm sure Karen knows that. So this happened around 2016. At the time, I was 25 years old and I'd been without a job for a while. I was looking for a better paying job than I had before, and I found one at a camera security company that was looking to hire somebody for the service desk, and I ended up getting the job. Now, my new manager was ex-military, specifically ex-army, and the guy really didn't like having people disagree with or going against him, a thing I was very unaware of when I took the job. For 2 to 3 months, everything was going well. The manager was cordial and he seemed to really enjoy having me there. I worked my butt off every day. However, after that period, my grandpa, who is like a second father to me, suddenly was hospitalized after having a stroke. This all happened on a Wednesday, and the family came together in the hospital several times to show support and see Grandpa. On Friday afternoon, 3 p.m., I was called up by my father while I was at work, and he explained to me that Grandpa unfortunately passed away. I was in tears on the phone and in utter shock. It took me a while to calm down. I then went to my manager and I explained what just happened, and that I'm going home to be with my family. However, that day at work, there was an event. The company was doing a charity event, and the charity was going to be public news. They already announced the amount of people participating, and it would look bad if they were a person down. It was basically just for good PR. So with all that happening, my boss refuses to let me go. I told him by law he can't deny me, as my contract states that I can take a day off for a death in the family, and that I was leaving right now. And this was the turning point. It was like a switch had flipped. He went from a nice manager to a manager from hell. Suddenly, everything I did was wrong, and I was told he couldn't believe I was in this line of work for 6 years and be this bad at my job. He would cuss me out and ridicule me in front of my colleagues and even clients. This all continued for several months, and it began to impact my mental health. I had a talk with my parents and my fiance, and they basically told me that this was not okay, that I didn't have to take this and I should give them my 2 weeks notice. I agreed, and the following day, I went to HR and I explained why I was leaving the company and that I can't stand the idea of working even a single day more with that excuse of a human being. HR did show interest in my well-being, and even more importantly, in what I was claiming about my manager. They had received more complaints about him, but nobody had proof of his wrongdoings, so they asked me if I had proof. I told them that I'd be looking for a new job, but I'd gladly fit in the time to collect all I could. So for the next 2 weeks, I collected everything. Memos, emails, voice recordings he had left me berating me, and I was also lucky that my colleagues at the desk had my back this entire time. They had been trying to cheer me up, and they said I was doing fine work, and that they didn't understand this man's behavior. So when I came by and asked if they'd mind signing a document that everything I stated in the paperwork was true, they gladly did. I had one last talk with HR and him at the same time on my last day I was there. Before he even walked in, I told the HR person who was mediating, hey, he's gonna walk in, say what he wants to say, and I'll be quiet and listen. When he's done, I'll explain my side, and the guy's gonna interrupt me and tell you I'm lying. And he'll talk about something completely non-related to drag the conversation another direction. She looked surprised at my comment, but had no time to respond as Mr. Army Man walks in, and he begins his spiel. Exactly as I stated, he'd blurt out his side, and once I tried to talk, he would consistently interrupt me, and he would try to pick fights. Eventually, I just get up, and I told HR, I told you so. Here's the documents you've been asking for. I then place a file folder in front of HR, with several dozens of emails, plenty of memos, and a USB containing 3 phone conversations of him yelling at me. You could easily hear him cuss me out. I gave the manager a big bright smile, who was smirking victoriously, and I said to him, I don't think you'll be smirking like that for long. His smirk disappears into a confused scowl, but I just slammed the door on him before he could respond, and I left the building feeling like a huge, planet-sized amount of stress fell off my shoulders. Within a month, I was back to my old self. 2 months later, I was working at a new job, and out of curiosity, I checked my ex-manager's LinkedIn. It said unemployed. I then call up one of my old work colleagues to ask exactly what went down. Apparently, my proof opened Pandora's box. He was being disrespectful to a lot of staff. He would insult older staff, and on multiple occasions, he was less than cordial with our external hires. None of these complaints were acted upon because it was his word against theirs, and there was no proof. However, me providing overwhelming proof of his behavior towards me made all other complaints now to be taken as fact. He was promptly fired less than a month after I left, and they refused to provide him with any form of reference. In a field like this, his references mean a lot. So not getting one from a company that you worked at for so long is a huge red flag. 4 years have passed, and according to LinkedIn, he's still not working in his field. I will gladly admit that I felt rather satisfied, and I still do, when I happen to think about it. Again, it's always so satisfying to see justice being served. And posts like this always reminds me of the quote that people don't leave jobs, they leave bosses. That said though, I'm questioning the company at this point, guys, because the guy had a pile of complaints against him, but they still did nothing after all that time. And even after OP provided the proof, it took a month to get rid of that guy. Thank goodness OP got out of that place, and it's nice to know the guy never got another job in the field again. And this OP shares the time they destroyed their power-tripping boss with evidence. A few years back, I got hired as a supervisor for a local government. I was to help supervise about 10 employees. Above me was a manager. The guy was a terrible leader, and he would often yell at people, give impossible tasks or deadlines. On my 3rd day in, he yells at me to, quote, learn how to do your effing job, in front of all the employees. The guy made snide remarks to other employees that he was going to terminate me on probation. He also demanded that I keep a communication log with every task he assigns me and update it as I complete them. He also chastised me my first weekend for not having any questions emailed to him by the end of the week. He told me that he expects me to send 3 questions every week until I'm off probation. The next week, I sent him 3 questions as required, and he replied back to look up the answers myself. This guy was out to get me. He would give me a task, and then another task, and then ask why I didn't get the first task done. I also found out that he rode the old supervisor that way until he got enough dirt on him to terminate him. So I decided it was a war. I kept a log of every perceived policy violation, broken rule, inappropriate comment, and people who witnessed it. I also engaged other supervisors and employees from other departments. After 28 days of employment, I was ready to quit. I kept a resignation letter in my car, and that gave me the power I needed to press on. After 28 days, I filed a formal complaint with HR. At the time, I convinced other supervisors to do the same. After that, several employees filed complaints, and then a group complaint was filed. HR investigated the complaints, and the manager was placed on administrative leave. The investigation concluded that the manager did violate numerous policies, and he created a hostile work environment, and he ends up resigning. Since then, he's been burning bridges at every employer, 3 so far. And the guy went from a manager of 15 employees and a great pension making $95,000 a year to a low-level laborer employee making about $25 an hour in a hole-in-the-wall facility. And to be fair, the guy created his own problems. I just helped HR see it. So I own a restaurant and I employ around 5 girls that work most nights. The employee in question, who we'll call Mary, has been working with me for 6 years. She's my senior employee. She works 6 nights a week. She's an excellent worker, and I even make her temporary manager when I can't make it to work a few times a year. Well, last week, during the night with myself and 2 other girls, Mary gets a call from her brother saying he accidentally left their 4-year-old sister at home by herself, and that he and their parents wouldn't be back for at least 2 to 3 hours. Of course, Mary panics, and she tells me she had to leave. I initially was hesitant, but Mary wouldn't stop begging, and she even offered to not receive payments for the hours she'd worked this week. I accepted, and then she went home to look after her sister. When I told my daughter what happened, she was in shock that I agreed to not pay Mary. My view is that Mary was the one who wanted to go home for the family emergency, and she even suggested not getting paid. My daughter called me an a-hole and stubborn, and a few other words that I've punished her for. So am I the a-hole? Guys, I had to share this post because what OP's asking is quite frankly ridiculous, right? Like, how are you not the a-hole in this situation? You have this employee, an excellent employee in your own words, who's been loyal for 6 years, and the one time she begs you to go home, you deny it. And on top of that, you accept her offer to not pay her for the hours she worked that week, which I don't even think is legal. Like, that just shows how desperate she was to get home to her family emergency. Like, what in the world is wrong with some people? And what makes this even worse is OP punishes her daughter for having more sense than her. Definitely the a-hole in this situation. And listen, I wouldn't be surprised if OP's excellent employee starts looking for work elsewhere in the future. Like, imagine working 6 years for the same employer, busting your ass day in and day out, only to be treated like this in a time of need. Holy crap-holy, this post made my blood boil. Guys, let me know your thoughts on this post. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our / entitled people. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's in our / entitled people episode, where once again, bad bosses are getting absolutely destroyed. Guys, go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.